All right, good morning, Grace Church. So good to be here. It's been great to worship, to sing, to hear this good news of the report back from yesterday. Such good stuff going on. Well, several years ago, I came across an article that was entitled Googling for God. And the author had done some study and found the top questions that people were asking Google about God. Let's take a look at them, at least the top three. First one was this: who created God? Have you ever wondered that? Say yes. Type yes in the chat room. All right, here's another one. Why does God allow suffering? Anybody ever asked that one? Raise your hand, say yes, type yes in the chat room. Now this one, frankly, surprised me. Number three, why does God hate me? Whoa, that's intense. They're all intense. But the author went on and said, people often hesitate to ask their questions about God, but they don't hesitate when it comes to Google. Because they can do a private search, they can inevitably share what's on their heart with Google, and they may be embarrassed to ask somebody else. Now, here's the good news of this series. We're invited to come to Jesus with our questions. That's what this series, Asking for a Friend, is all about. We discovered in the very first week that God actually welcomes our questions. Jesus teaches us to pray, and he does so this way: ask, seek, knock, and then he promises the door will be opened. And that door, I've discovered in my life, just so you know, is not always the answer that I'm looking for, but it is always the God and Savior that I need. And it's his love and grace that invites me into a relationship with him, even if the questions remain. So we're going to continue to go through this series, and today we're going to humbly ask God to help us answer the second question that's on Google, and really the, I think, closely related third question. But first, hey, for extra credit, what about that first question, who created God? Ever wondered that before? So here's the way I would answer that briefly, is that the very first words of the Bible answer that question for us. Genesis 1:1 says this. Read it out loud with me. Here we go. In the beginning, God. See, in the beginning, God was. God has no beginning. God has no end. Nobody created God. God is. Now, that's great. But for me, it only causes more confusion. How about you? If you figure this one out, email me. But it really only makes the second and third questions more confusing, because here's the deal. If God is, always has been, and always will be, if God is powerful enough to exist above time, then I really want to know, why does God allow suffering? And if he does allow suffering, have you ever wondered this? Is that mean God somehow mad at me or hates me? Like, have you ever thought, poor little old me? You know, am I the only one that's done that? Okay, well, good. The world's a better place. So we're going to dive into this. Okay, so first of all, let's agree that suffering comes to all of us throughout life. Notice the question today is not to suffer or not to suffer. No, that's not the question. Life is iffy business. It's got an if right in the middle of the word. Life, think about it. It's an equal opportunity offender, suffering is. And it's not an elective course in the course of life. We all are going to find some days of suffering. In fact, the Bible never shies away from this reality, that to live on this side of eternity means that we will encounter times of pain and sorrow, loss, grief, depression, hardship, trouble, suffering. Jesus actually plainly states this to his followers. If you're somebody who was thinking, you know, if I become a follower of Jesus, I'm going to have a carefree life. Well, check this out. John 16:33. Some of you already read this, I guess. Read it out loud with me. Here we go. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So I like that Jesus has overcome the world, but the first part, it's troubling, isn't it? In the world, you'll have trouble. So it's not just like God is specifically after you if you encounter suffering. It's part of life. And it leads us to ask questions that usually start with the word why. Why? Sometimes the rest of the question goes like this: God, why is my child suffering? God, why am I going through a divorce? God, why did my loved one die? God, why is my business falling apart? God, why did my friend betray me? God, why is there still so much racism? Or this one's a fill in the blank. God, why can't I stop? And then you fill in your own blank here. Why can't I stop eating or shopping or drinking or gambling or worrying or being angry all the time? Now, normally we like to keep these things to ourselves, don't we? We don't reveal these out loud. It's kind of a weird discussion to even have right now because we conceal suffering. Think about the way we handle our hospice houses. We put them far away from other businesses, hidden away where nobody can see them. I recently came across an ad for a funeral home architectural firm. And I admit only a pastor would click on this ad, but I did it, okay? It's weird, I know. But this funeral home promised that they would come and they would build a less intimidating building that will look like a country club or an event center. Well, that's in keeping with the way we handle suffering. I've shared before, when my wife and I lost our son Daniel at birth, the hospital we were at hid us down an empty hallway. We were all by ourselves. Why? Because we don't want to be around suffering. Nobody does. We like to keep it at a safe distance. But the problem is suffering doesn't behave, and we can't keep it away. Seems to me there's three groups of people that are listening to this message right now. First, there's some of us that are remembering some suffering we've been through, right? Secondly, there's some people, and we don't know this necessarily, who are getting ready to go through suffering. See, here's the problem with suffering. It doesn't schedule an appointment. It just barges in, doesn't it? Doesn't give us the date ahead of time. That's the second group of us. But then there's a third group. I want to talk to you just for a moment. Third, there's a group of people who are you are suffering immensely right now. You may be in the middle of suffering, and you might be to the point of suffering that you're asking questions. But frankly, and I've been there, there may be some of us that are in the place of suffering where you don't even care what the answer is to the question. You just want it to stop. You just want to make it through the next hour. Maybe you're in a place where you're filled with anger, or you're filled with anguish, you're filled with pain. You just want to know how you're going to live the next hour. And if that's you, I want to say to you, I understand. I get it. I've been there. And I want to encourage you during this time, right now, to just rest in God's love for you. Even if you don't feel it, even if you don't believe it, just rest in God's love for you. If you're in shock, if you're full of anger, if you're barely holding back tears right now, would you just be with Jesus and let him love you? I believe somehow, some way, that Jesus is with you, even if you don't know it. Because I believe there's never a grave that is opened, and there's never a heart that is broken that Jesus doesn't notice and care. I believe this, God can use the last part of this message, I think, for you. So hang in there. All right, so let's take a look at the question head on today. We promised you this version of the question. Here it is. Why is there so much suffering? A couple weeks ago, your pastors gathered together on Zoom. We had a very lively discussion for 2 hours. We searched the scriptures, we prayed, we debated, and we realized we have to bring an answer today. We couldn't dodge it, and be like, why is so much suffering? I don't know. Let's move on. So here's the answer we want to propose. It's imperfect, but there it is on the screen. Suffering can be explainable, mysterious, and redemptive. That's our best answer. Now, say that with me because it's today's sermon in a sentence. Here we go. Suffering can be explainable, mysterious, and redemptive. What we're going to do is walk through this piece by piece for a moment, okay? First of all, suffering can be explainable. Now, I've shared before, I've confessed, I'm a history nerd. I like to read plaques. Yes, I'm one of those guys. And with this comes this curiosity about where we get certain inventions. And I am always trying to find out where modern inventions come from. I like to read about it. I love Wikipedia. I'm that guy. So I was recently finding some inventions that are common, and in fact, they're worldwide phenomenons, and they all had very odd and interesting starts. For example, one of the most popular inventions in all time has to be the Popsicle. Now, this was an accidental invention in 1905. A kid named Frank Epperson was out one evening, and it was a cold evening. He poured some sugar into some soda water and mixed it together, and he had a stick and he was stirring it when it was time for bed. He left the stick in the cup. He went to bed. He got up the next morning. He came out and he picked up the stick, and then there was all of this beautiful ice on it that was sugary ice, and the Popsicle was born. Hallelujah. He called it the Episicle, and he gave it to all of his friends in the neighborhood. And later on, he renamed it Popsicle, and he made billions of dollars. Anyway, so one more. How about this one? 1943, a Navy engineer named Richard Jones was charged with designing a meter to monitor power on a battleship. So he's working on this, and at the time he's working on it, one of the springs fell out of his arms, and it started moving down the hallway, and it actually started moving down a flight of stairs. At this moment, the Slinky was born. How cool is it? Okay, let's applaud Slinky. That's great. Oh, but it gets better. I'll give you one more. So, 1930, Ruth Wakefield, she owned the Toll House Inn. One day, she set out to bake some chocolate cookies for her guests. She was out of baker's chocolate, so she went and got some chocolate bars. She broke up the chocolate. She put it in the cookie dough. She baked it, and she thought the chocolate would spread out. It didn't. Instead, it became chocolate chip cookies. Hallelujah. Okay, so these common items have very odd beginnings, right? And now for some bad news. The same is true for suffering. So suffering has a very odd start, and it's spread now to become a global phenomenon. Let me talk with you about the origins of suffering. It starts early in the Bible. Now remember the beginning parts of the Bible, first 2 chapters of Genesis, fantastic. There's no suffering, there's no death, there's no sorrow. God himself looks back at creation, takes a step back and says, wow, this is very good. And indeed it was. Which is why, by the way, yesterday was very good. That you help people know that God is good. God's creation is good. They are not going to know unless we show them. And so this is how things starts. It's very good. Well, God gave people one instruction. He said with all the blessings that they are not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good or evil. He said, for when you eat of it, you will surely die. So God didn't create robots. He created people with free will. And here's what happens with that gift of freedom. This is the unfortunate invention, Genesis 3, 1 through 5. So, the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, did God really say, you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? Well, of course we can eat fruit from the trees of the garden, the woman replied. It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we're not allowed to eat. God said, you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die. Well, you won't die, the serpent replied to the woman. God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. So the story is this a tempter on the ground causes people to use their free will in a destructive way. If you unpack all the imagery, why did they do it? It's the same reason I do stupid stuff. It's because of pride. They wanted to be like God. Something I like to do too. Do you? I like to call my own shots. But when they made this choice, they set into motion an ever unfolding set of consequences that frankly we're still dealing with today. And one of the immediate lasting results of sin is suffering. Now let's unpack suffering. Some suffering is obvious. Heard a story about a guy who went to the doctor. He said, hey doc, it hurts when I do this. The doctor said, stop doing that. He said, okay. He said, you're healed. Congrats. Some suffering is cause and effect. Let's think about that kind of suffering. A few years ago, I was driving up I-75. I had my 15-year-old son in the car. And I was going too fast. I don't know how to say that. I was speeding. So I was going really fast, having a great time. And then I got pulled over. I got a huge ticket. And then my budget was wrecked for the next several months. I had to go to traffic school. It was bad news. And I started thinking, right after the police officer left and I started driving again, I actually started saying out loud, why did this happen? God, this is not fair. Why am I suffering so? My 15-year-old was in the car and he was never shy to voice his opinion. And at this moment, he solved the theological quandary. He said, Dad, you're speeding. You broke the law. You got busted. That's why you're suffering. Oh, don't encourage him. What if he's watching? Anyway, some suffering is self-imposed and it's obvious. Now, this is true in other areas of my life. If I don't set limits for myself, then I can get run down. I can get sick. If I don't spend time with Jesus, I become very grumpy. Just ask people around me. Suffering sometimes is my own reenactment of Genesis chapter 3. When I want to be like God, I want to do it, as Sinatra said, my way. Well, that's explainable, isn't it? Let's keep going with this explainable part. Sometimes it's not the result of my sin, but suffering is the result of somebody else's sin. It's a direct result. We can just draw a straight line. Life is a contact sport. We often bump into one another. Happened to me a year ago. I went to a local gas station. I bought gas, put my debit card in there, and evidently, I didn't know this until 3 hours later, but evidently at that moment, I started buying gas for people all over the country. And my bank called me and they said, are you in like Phoenix? And then, did you drive to New Jersey? I'm like, no. I said, well, congrats, you're buying gas for everybody. You got skimmed. And so as I was filling out the reports, I had to go get a new debit card, cut up all the stuff. I was thinking, why, God? And then I realized, oh, somebody was greedy. They stole from me. Mystery over. Now, I want to say this. If you're being taken advantage of today, first I want you to know it's not your fault. But I do want to say, if you're in an abusive situation, if you're being physically, emotionally, sexually abused, it's time to get out and get help, okay? We're here for you today. We'll encourage you. We'll love you. We'll walk alongside you. It's not your fault. It's not the wrongs you've done. It's the wrongs being done to you. Amen. Okay. Well, that's the explainable part. So here's the dilemma, though. Not all suffering is a result of my sin or somebody else's sin. It's not a direct result. Some suffering doesn't have logical conclusions to it. That's why we added this word. Read this whole sentence with me now. Suffering can be explainable and mysterious. So sometimes in the mystery of the world, the system fails to function. We get forewarning of this on the weather reports during certain times of the year when they say some pressure or temperature or something changed hundreds of miles from here. Get ready, you're all going to have a hurricane, right? I don't understand that system. All I know is that the system failed to function. Something went wrong. I'm not a big fan, by the way, of those who say hurricanes hit certain people and places and cities because God is just judging them. You know, I'm not a fan. I think it's an immature, simplistic answer to a mysterious problem. The Bible says in Romans 8 that all creation groans for the new world, the new heaven and earth that Jesus is going to bring. We can't explain all that. Sometimes, though, the system fails to function. Not only its weather systems, but sometimes it's human systems. We put these things into place, we invent stuff, and it doesn't work. One time I got stuck on an elevator, and I got stuck there for over an hour, and this is not good for my anxiety. Now, why did that happen? The system failed to function. That's it. That's why. But as to why that day and what happened, it's a mystery. So sometimes these mysteries run even deeper. When I was 22 years old, I didn't get stuck on an elevator. Instead, I got diagnosed with aortic valve disease. I was declared disabled. My doctor told me he didn't know how long I would live. And I began to go around to my different doctors, and I was in seminary at the time, and I asked my professors, every one of them, why? And they said, I don't know. I don't know. I wondered the same about my struggles with depression and anxiety. Sure, I could point back to some realities in my life and choices I've made, but at the end of the day, I don't really know. Same is true with addictions and afflictions, hurts, habits, and hang-ups. Sometimes we can explain them right, but sometimes we cannot. Why do relationships go sideways? Sometimes we can explain it. Sometimes it's a mystery we can't. What do we do then? In those moments of mystery, I want to encourage you to be like one of my heroes of the faith. He was a guy in my church in Lexington. His name is Jeff, and he's an award-winning photographer and just an amazing man of God. And Jeff's wife, Sally, was dying of cancer when I was his pastor, and I frankly learned from Jeff about what it looks like to walk in the mystery of circumstances with great faith. And Jeff leaned into Jesus like never before, even in the mystery. It's interesting that his business, the slogan for Jeff Rogers Photography is this: there is a landscape greater than the one we can see. And see, Jeff clung to even the mystery that went beyond sight. What's that mean? It means walking by what? Faith. That's right. Which leads me to the last part of our sermon in a sentence today. Suffering can be explainable, mysterious, but what's the last word? And redemptive. That's right. Now here's the good news of today. 7 centuries before Jesus was born in the stable in Bethlehem, a prophet named Isaiah wrote about the coming king, the coming savior, who would not take the form of any king in history then or now. He would come as a suffering servant. Check out this description of Jesus. Isaiah 53, 3-6. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with the deepest grief. We turned our backs on him. We looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down, and we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so that we could be whole. He was whipped so that we could be healed. And all of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We've left God's paths to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. What's Isaiah doing here? What's God doing through the gift of his word? Well, instead of explaining the cause of every suffering that comes our way, Isaiah announces the good news that Jesus is going to come our way to join us in the midst of our suffering. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, he who knew no sin, became sin and joined us in the midst of our pain and our suffering. And not only was Jesus God with us, he became despised, rejected, acquainted with the deepest grief. He went back to the origins of suffering we just learned about, and he took it upon his own body. I love the way Mac Powell from the group Third Day poetically took these words from Isaiah and declared them in a beautiful song. He says of Jesus, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our sins. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds, what are the last 3 words? We are healed. How are we healed? Well, we're redeemed. We know what it is to redeem airline miles or coupons, but what does it mean to be redeemed by Jesus? To be redeemed is to exchange, to buy back, to purchase. We need to know the good news today, that Jesus enters into our sin and he buys us back so that we can experience wholeness and holiness right now. Jesus comes to us in our suffering and he transforms it into something good. The suffering that he did not cause, Jesus redeems it. This is the story of the Bible. All the way back in Genesis, we see a story of a young man named Joseph who came from a dysfunctional family. You think your family's dysfunctional? Read the story of Joseph. Oh my. His brothers sell him into slavery. And at the end of this story, decades later, Joseph meets his brothers again. And God had rescued Joseph over and over again from pain and trouble that God did not cause, and yet God became his savior. And that gave Joseph the power to declare Genesis 50:20, one of the most powerful verses in Scripture. Read it with me. Don't you see, you planned evil against me, but God used those same plans for my good. What you meant for evil, he says, God used for good. If I had to lay down the cause of suffering at somebody's feet, I'd lay it right at the feet of the devil. That's who is causing all of this mess. The devil is evil. Evil is the word live spelled backwards. Think about it. But on the cross, Jesus defeats the plans of the devil. He defeats sin. He defeats suffering. And he defeats even death itself. Can the people of God say yes? And this is an already but not yet reality. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks when we talk about the end times. Some of you are wanting to know about that. Well, here's a sneak preview. Jesus is coming back. All right, let's review our question and answer for today. Why is there so much suffering? Because this is the best answer we got. Suffering can be explainable, mysterious, and redemptive. All right, I want to talk to two groups of you. Two groups of people. First of all, if you're suffering right now, I want to share from my heart with you. And I want to encourage you with these words. When I'm suffering, I need to embrace the pain in me. I want to run from pain. How about you? I want to ignore it, try to escape it. Today, I invite you to embrace it. Paul says, the apostle, that somehow, mysteriously, we go through a Good Friday and we arrive at an Easter when we do this. He says, let's take God up on his invitation. Let me take your suffering and let me absorb it. And then transform it. Let me change it into something new. Jesus can redeem your suffering and mine. Remember, Paul suffered untold troubles and difficulties in his life and in his ministry. And yet here's his life verse. It's Philippians 2:10 and 11, where he declares this: I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. Oh, I love that part. Here's where it's tough. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that one way or another, I will experience the resurrection from the dead. Now, what does this mean for us? It means that we enter into Jesus' suffering just as he enters into ours. And something amazing, something supernatural happens in that. We join him in his death so that, why? We could just suffer together? No, that's not the end of the story. It's so that we can be raised to a brand new, transformed life. See, that's the good news that even surpasses suffering. And I know it doesn't take away all the loss. It doesn't take away all the pain. I still want my dad Howard back. I miss him. I want my son Daniel to be alive. I don't want to deal with the aortic heart valve that's diseased. I'm tired of it. I don't want to deal with depression and anxiety. Yet if suffering is going to come my way, I want to put it into the hands of the one who can redeem it and to transform it and to make it into something good for my life and for his glory. All right. If you are trying to, I want to talk to the second group. And this was hard too. It's for those of us that are trying to walk alongside somebody we love who is suffering. What do we do? Well, let me suggest this. When others are suffering, I need to embrace the person in pain. I need to embrace the person in pain. This is practicing what's often called the ministry of presence. And that's different than the ministry of answering questions or fixing things. And I love those last two. When I was a chaplain at hospice, I was a student chaplain at hospice, and I had 66 patients that were assigned to me. And within my tenure there, over 6 months, all 66 died. They say it's not surprising, you were working at a hospice unit after all. Well, it was hard in the middle of it because every single one of those patients or their loved one, every single one of them, at some point grabbed me by the shirt and said, "Why?" From the mother of the 17-year-old all the way to the spouse of the 102-year-old. They all had the same question, why? And you know what? I like to try to give them an answer my first few months there. And under the watchful eye of my supervisors, I got in trouble. My supervisors called me into their office several times. Eventually, they had to write me up. And here was what was on my disciplinary report. They said, "Wes, you need to learn one thing, and it's contained in 2 words. Here it is. Be quiet. Don't walk in there and start cracking jokes and trying to make everybody happy or coming up with answers you don't know anything about." And then they said, "Here's the real problem that's going on inside of you. You don't want to admit this, but the truth is, you don't know." And indeed, they were right. I don't like saying that to you. But this is a good answer for those of you who are caring for somebody who's going through suffering. This is more helpful, I think, when we're just honest with people about the difficulty and suffering that comes their way. We don't need to make up answers that would fit nicely on a greeting card. Answers that I've had people offer to me. "Wes, well, here's what happened. God needed another angel in heaven." Not in the Bible. Or how about this one? "Wes, don't worry. Everything happens for a reason." Nope. Not in the Bible. How about this one? "Wes, don't worry. God will never give you more than you can handle." Again, not in the Bible. It's not biblical. It's not even helpful. I heard somebody say in response to that, "God gave me more than I can handle, so can you come to my house on Tuesday and help me do some laundry?" So friends, let's not speak of things that are higher than what we can understand. Let's not make up pat phrases that frankly make us feel better and make the person suffering feel worse. Instead, we can say this truth with great love: I don't know. A few months ago, my wife Becky courageously shared her journey of recovery from addiction to drugs and alcohol. You can watch it on our YouTube channel or at our website. I encourage you to do so. It's at the first week of September at Choose Recovery. I want to share a little bit of what I learned during the time before that and during and even after. It was this. Through that period of suffering, I needed to stop trying to fix Becky and save Becky. And I needed to trust God to do so. This meant that I needed to work with my counselor, which I did for 7 years. It meant I needed to work on my codependency. It meant I needed to go to Al-Anon meetings. It meant that I needed to have weekly accountability, as I have for the last 15 years with Pastor George, every week. Basically, I've had to do things I've encouraged you to do. In my own suffering, I needed to embrace the pain in me with Jesus by my side. And when it came to my wife, I needed to sit with her in her pain. I needed to do so without trying to fix her. In my first Al-Anon meeting, somebody said these words, and I wrote them down. We didn't cause it. When thinking about somebody else's suffering, we didn't cause it. We can't change it. We can't cure it. But we can be there. We can be in prayer. I realized I could set appropriate boundaries and love Becky and pray for her. And I learned all that I'm sharing with you today, that suffering can be explainable, mysterious, and redemptive. Some of our suffering was my fault. Some of our suffering was her fault. Some was mysterious. But in all of it, I found that Jesus could redeem every part of the suffering. And he could do so for our good and then for his glory that he's getting right now. This has nothing to do with me or her or our family. This is to the glory of God. And my prayer is that the same would be true for you. If you're suffering today, God doesn't hate you. In fact, God loves you so much that he sent Jesus Christ from heaven to earth, where he emptied himself and he became humble, and he even entered into our suffering. How low will he go? He went in even to a grave so that he could join us in our pain. He's acquainted with the deepest grief and the deepest anguish. Why? So that we wouldn't stay there, but that we could join him in the resurrection of life. That is our hope as followers of Jesus. There's an old song that says it best: something beautiful, something good, all my confusion he understood. All I had to offer him was brokenness and strife. But he made something beautiful of my life. May the same be true for you today. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's stand for prayer. Lord, we love you. We thank you that you first loved us, and you love us right as we find ourselves today, whether we're suffering, whether we're with somebody that's suffering. And Lord, thank you that you want to pour your grace into our brokenness. And so as we sing this song, we open our hearts to you and invite you in and ask for your help, thanking you that you freely offered it. Now may we freely receive. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So there's 3 ways to pray here. You can come to the altar, and you can also join us in our prayer room. It's out the back, and we have a staff person that's there, and they'll pray with you. Be glad to do that in person. And then if you'll follow the online links in the chat room, your host today, if you're watching online, will be honored to pray with you and for you. And however you choose to, please engage in this last song, as it speaks about being gracefully broken and the good news of God's grace that comes to all of us who found brokenness in our life. Let's worship together as our team leads us.